handwritten ledgers show 12.7 million in undisclosed cash payments designated for Mr. Manafort. According to Ukraine's newly formed, that's not really true, National Anti-Corruption Bureau. This is called the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, or NABU. Now, let's show you that. I'm just going to go to the Wikipedia entry here because it's a good summary. You can, if you don't trust it, you can look up anything yourself. It was actually formed in October 2014. So it's not newly created in 2016. But it was created after the Maidan Revolution. And you'll notice here that NABU is a Ukrainian law enforcement anti-corruption agency, and it was established in 2014, and was created at the request of the IMF. And right here it says it has an evidence gathering sharing agreement with the FBI. And by the way, the reference here is to the New York Times story I just showed you. This part is crucially important for you to understand. There's no conjecture here. NABU is working with the FBI. In fact, NABU helped set it up. And in fact, if we go to NABU's own website, let's do that here. Here's their own, we'll come back to that. Here we go. Here's NABU in June of 2016, so before August, saying they've signed a memorandum of understanding with the FBI for strengthening the existing cooperation. In other words, the FBI is already working with them. This is the NABU site. You can read it, go to it, nabu.gov.ua, which is the Ukrainian thing. Okay? So this was set up by the United States with the FBI at the request of the IMF. And they have an evidence sharing agreement with the FBI. That means that Comey knew what was going on at NABU. This is conjecture on my part, but he's head of the FBI. And you're going to see later why I'm making that conjecture. What someone needs to do is ask him about this in detail. Now, this detail that NABU is the one who supplied the information is crucially important. Remember I showed you before that on August 14th, the New York Times publishes this piece. On August 19th, he's resigned. Well, look what NABU published themselves. This FBI, the FBI is in office right at NABU. They don't just share evidence, they're right there. And NABU officials had been to Washington, D.C. in February, by the way, of 2016. And I can't show you that right here, but I'll talk about it in a little bit. I want you to notice what this is. Right here, this is on August 18th, the day before Manafort resigned. NABU itself releases Paul Manafort's mention on the Black Ledger. They have right on their own website, it's right here. And don't forget, especially since this involves an American, the FBI was definitely aware of it. 100% they were aware of it because that's why they're there, to be aware of stuff with the FBI. So before Manafort was indicted, when he gets taken out, and no one seems to have picked up on this, this FBI organization, right, connected directly to NABU, NABU releases the information, and NABU's the one who had the information. So the government of Ukraine are the people, the government of Ukraine and the FBI are the people who released, oops, he should retweet it, but I just want to make sure this is super clear. We'll come back to him. One sec. They are the people that released the information, according to the New York Times, that got Manafort to resign. Does that make sense? And there's a whole bunch of other stuff, blah, blah, blah. You can read the whole article. It's stuff about Deripaska and all this stuff. It's all a smokescreen to hide the fact that the government of Ukraine, and don't forget, what we know from this article is Alexander Chalupa was targeting Manafort back in 2015. And that's right in this article as well. If I just look up 2015 here, I'll show it to you. Chalupa told Politico she developed a network of sources in Kiev and Washington, including investigative journalists, we'll talk about that, government officials, and private intelligence operatives. Then she's talking about she's consulting at the DNC. When Trump's unlikely presidential campaign began surging in late 2015, she began focusing more on research and expanded to Trump's ties to Russia. And specifically, she was looking for stuff on Manafort. And Andrei Leschenko has said this. So again, I want you to understand what was going on here. Alexander Chalupa, working with the Ukrainian embassy and Ambassador Chali, is seeking out dirt on Trump before the Trump Tower meeting, before the Russian hack, even is claimed to have happened, if you believe it's a Russian hack, which I don't, but before it's even claimed to have happened. This was a setup by the DNC, and they were working with the Ukrainian embassy. Now let's talk about journalists. Let's start to introduce a new character here that you've probably never heard of. Oops. Let's try it again. Sergei Leschenko. Why is it only playing part of the Sergei Leschenko? That's sad. Okay, for some reason I only have part of the graphic here, so pretend there's a whole graphic, but there you go. Sergei Leschenko. There's him. Boom. Okay. I think something happened in the conversion process. Sorry. I'm the only journalist who apologizes for shortened graphics that they've made, because I'm the only journalist who makes their own graphics. Who is Sergei Leschenko? Let's talk about him. But let's go back to this article first, because I told you you're going to start to find stuff in here that you didn't notice. Okay. If you go back to this original New York Times article that ran on the 14th, and we look up Leschenko, you'll see the accounting record surfaced this year when Sergei Leschenko, a member of parliament, who said he'd received a partial copy from a source he did not identify, published line item. So in other words, he's saying he got this. Leschenko said another source had provided the entire ledger to this guy, Victor Trepak, a former director of the SBU, who passed it to NABU. So Leschenko is saying, Leschenko's key here. Who is Leschenko? Let's talk about him. Okay? Now, when I say he's the shill who took down... Oh, by the way, let's point out one other thing before I move on here. In June of 2017, after the election's over, suddenly Ukraine says, you can see in this Bloomberg story, that there's no evidence of illicit payments to Manafort. So that whole thing that got Manafort taken out, that whole thing, that whole New York Times story, later Ukraine says, oh, that didn't happen, after the election. And right as Ukraine, the president is coming to visit Trump. We'll talk more about this, but I want to point out that whole New York Times story that got Manafort to resign was fake news. You with me? It was fake news drummed up by the Democrats, and as you just saw, Sergei Leschenko. So let's talk about who he is. Okay? Sergei Leschenko, here's who he is. He's a politician and a journalist. They said he's a member of parliament, but he's part of the Petro Poroshenko bloc. Don't forget, Poroshenko's the guy behind this, right? Now, let's talk about his background, and specifically a connection. Here's a story about him. The Ukrainian who sunk Paul Manafort. Sergei Leschenko says Ukraine needs its own Robert Mueller. This is a recent story, August of this year. Here he is, not me saying he's the guy who sunk Manafort. Here's the newspaper. He's billing himself. I'm the guy who sunk Manafort. Who is this guy? Okay. Here's an example of his journalism. By the way, he's He's on a number of articles here on this site, Open Democracy. Now, who's Open Democracy? Open Democracy, this is a list of their funders. Okay, not-for-profit enterprise in the UK. Let's look at their funders. Let's go right to the big funders, shall we? We'll skip the $1,000 funders, and we'll jump right to the end here. The £100,000 Open Societies Foundation, that would be George Soros. Open Societies Foundation, oh, there's another $100,000 or more. We don't even know how much it is because it's plus 100,000. Here's another Soros Open Societies Foundation. 3 different Open Societies Foundations contributed over £100,000 to Open Democracy. If we go back, oh look, here's another Open Society Foundation. $60,000 to $80,000. Oh look, here's the National Endowment for Democracy. Who's National Endowment for Democracy? Well, here's an article from the Economic Times saying that 3 American NGOs, including one patronized by Soros, were put on a government watch list. One of those is the National Endowment for Democracy. This is in New Delhi when Modi was saying this should be looked into. Soros is a backer of the National Endowment for Democracy. Sergei Leschenko was a fellow, I believe, in 2003. But it goes back deeper than that, actually. By the way, Soros would meet with Leschenko every time he was in Ukraine. Here's an interview with George Soros from 2000. This goes back to the year 2000, 18 years ago. And who did the interview? Sergei Leschenko. Okay? So when I say his connections to Soros are deep and long-standing, that's what I mean. Again, it's all publicly available information. You can find all of this fairly easily if you're looking for it. Why isn't anybody looking for it? I don't know. This is the guy, Leschenko, behind taking out Manafort, according to, I just showed it to you, according to him, and according to the New York Times story. Now, the other connection that Leschenko has was with Gregory Piat. He was the ambassador to Ukraine. Not sure about that? Let's watch a video. This is a video put out by the Embassy of the U.S. congratulating Gregory Piat. Now, don't forget, the Maidan has worked out horribly for the people of Ukraine. Corruption is worse than ever under Petro Poroshenko. People are living on like $300 a month. There's no jobs. Gas has gone up 3 or 4 times. But watch Leschenko. Let's watch this video. Watch the subtitles. He's talking about Gregory Piat. This is from these are your tax dollars at work.
Пане посол Джефрі, ми вам вдячні за все, що ви робили, перебуваючи тут з найвищою дипломатичною місією США в Києві. І на ваш час припала найбільш видатна подія в історії сучасної України – це Революція Гідності. Революція, коли українські громадяни вийшли захищати європейські цінності, права людини, демократію, свій вибір історичний, який ми зробили під час цих 3 зимових місяців на Майдані. І ви були свідком цих подій, але ви були не лише спостерігачем, ви були активним учасником переговорів, ви посадили за один стіл владу та опозицію, ви робили все для того, щоб не було кровопролиття. І ваші зусилля, вони високо оцінені українськими громадянами. Я переконаний, що ці відчуття, якою є Україна, ви принесете з собою все життя. І на інших посадах ви будете згадувати про Україну теплим словом, а ми, в свою чергу, будемо і далі будувати європейську демократичну державу.
He was. Okay. So you have to understand that Leschenko, working directly with Soros, none of which gets mentioned in the Times article or any of these other articles. And when you start looking for him, you'll see he shows up everywhere. Let me try to